Arguing whether the Bible is the most influential book of all time is completely unnecessary. Even if from time to time we see some gaps here and there, we cannot argue that people who call themselves Christians are, to put it mildly, different. Over the millennia, we can see many individuals who are radically convinced of their beliefs, who not only change themselves and then dedicate their entire lives to the faith they have to the point where they are finally ready and even pay with the price of their lives for these same convictions, beliefs that they have. And yet the Bible can still be a very influential book, one that actually spreads a good message about morality, values, and the people who read it become better. And that still does not make it a historically accurate and true book. It describes events, real historical figures, as well as stories and statements that, if they could be proven true, would completely transform the doubts of every person about whether this person called Jesus Christ was true, or is it fiction? And two, is it really a blog? And that's why in this video, we're going to do something very different from the other videos we've done so far, and we're going to look at 10 found historical artifacts that prove the veracity of the biblical stories and show to what extent the historical events described therein are true. Let's start with number 1, the Qumran manuscripts, or as they are better known in English, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were discovered between 1947 and 1956 in the caves of Qumran by the Dead Sea, a location that is obviously very important to the biblical plots. The Qumran manuscripts represent one of the most important archaeological finds in biblical history. In general, these manuscripts contain fragments of every one book in the Hebrew Bible. The Book of Esther is an exception. These manuscripts are significant because they show the accuracy of the biblical translations that we have today and show how they were transmitted. True, over the millennia, which is of enormous importance, especially for people who claim that the Bible is a compromised book, which, due to the many copies and translations, has totally changed over the centuries. No, it has not changed. The manuscripts also include a number of apocryphal texts that are not part of our traditional canon, but provide additional information and allow us to better imagine the beliefs and traditions that people had during the existence of the Second Temple. The dating of these manuscripts is set from 3,000 years ago. Well, that's what I call a perfect PP. Reservation, like number 2, the Jerusalem Pool of Siloam. In chapter 9 of the Gospel of John, we read about a man born blind, and it also mentions a pool named Siloam. In 2004, in the southern part of the city of David, during the renovation of a simple sewage pipe, the builders accidentally discovered stone steps leading to this so-called Pool of Siloam. This pool dates back to the time of the biblical king Hezekiah, when he diverted the waters from the Gihon spring to flow inside the walls of the city of David, and thus protecting Jerusalem from attack. The Pool of Siloam not only provided water for the city's inhabitants, but was also a place for ritual purification for worshippers before they could go to the temple. It was most commonly used before the 3 major feasts of Passover, Pentecost or Shavuot, and the Feast of Tabernacles or Tabernacles. But as I mentioned earlier, it is also the place where Jesus Christ himself healed this blind man, as described in John 9, as we read. Jesus tells him to go wash in Siloam. He goes, washes, and returns. You see, the discovery of the campaign in the 2nd and 4th years shows the geographical accuracy of the Gospel of John and connects us in real time with this miracle, which symbolizes one spiritual cleansing of the blind, which we all have been, before we meet Christ number 3, the destroyed city of Jericho. In the book of Joshua, in chapter 6, we read about the capture of the city of Jericho by someone else but Joshua, or in other words, Joshua, God gives him instructions on how to take the city. The Israelites must go around the walls of the city of Jericho for 6 days, once a day, holding the Ark of the Covenant, and with trumpets that the priests blow on the 7th day after they have gone around the city 7 times, and the priests blow their trumpets loudly, and the whole people shout loudly at the moment. The people shout, the walls of Jericho collapse, and the Israelites invade the city, and in this way conquer it as well. They destroy everything inside except the house of Ahab. In the book of Joshua 6 chapter 20 and verse we read, when they blew the trumpets, the people shouted, the truth collapsed next to me. Right now you see footage of the modern location of the city of Jericho. To this day you can see the double walls in the city between which the inhabitants lived. Then something like a hallmark of the place, we also see clay walls that are on top of stone walls, all of which are destroyed as if they were pushed down from above. From some invisible force, we also see signs of burning, as well as the very wall of the ancient city, which still stands collapsed today. Archaeological excavations show the sudden collapse of the walls, which is dated to around 1400 BC, and the fate of the city of Jericho, and the reason for the collapse of these strongly fortified walls, remains a mystery to all archaeologists except for those who have their Bibles. Or, the Pontius Pilate stone or tablet archaeologists are finding more evidence outside the Bible that supports it. What you see next to me is the so-called Pilate tablet. This fascinating archaeological discovery was made in 1961. This limestone block was discovered in Caesarea, Israel, and bears an inscription that refers to Pontius Pilate himself, the Roman governor who presided over the trials of Jesus. Although the jasper is worn and relatively unclear, it clearly mentions Pilate as well as his title as something like governor of Judea, which absolutely irrefutably confirms his historical existence as an important person in Jewish history and as a key figure in the New Testament. Previously, the discovery of Pilate's role in the Gospels has often been questioned and debated, but this stone is solid evidence that connects the biblical texts with real history. After the stone was discovered during excavations around the Roman theater about this meeting between Jesus and Pilate, you can read more in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 27 verse 5 in the Eldon stone. Next to me, you see the so-called City of David, which he conquered about 3,000 years ago and made it the center and capital of his kingdom. Yet, until about 40 years ago, many scholars completely disputed the existence of such a King David, arguing that he is mentioned nowhere else except in the historical sources found in the Bible, which, if you ask me, is quite silly, considering that the Bible is the best historical source ever. And yet, these debates were definitively interrupted in 1993. At that time, archaeologists made a discovery that forever changed the way we view history. In a place called Tel Dan, located in northern Israel, a huge stone or inscription known as the Eldon stone was found, dating back to the 9th century BC. It recounts the victory of King Hazael of Aram Damascus over Israel, and contains the earliest known mention of the so-called House of David, which clearly confirms the existence of King David as a historical figure. In this inscription, King Hazael boasts about his victory over Israel and over the ruler of the so-called House of David, which is David. However, these exact events are described one-to-one in the Bible itself, as you will find in these places. It is you who describes events, others the enemies, and describe the events and your stories to match this. I call irrefutable story number 6 the seal of King Hezekiah. And in 2015, archaeologists made a discovery of the prophet Isaiah, which in my opinion should completely silence all critics of the authenticity of the Bible. When we think about the great purposes of the Bible, we can very easily and quickly think, as we have already mentioned about King David, about King Solomon, but we will also quickly mention King Hezekiah. The shots that you see next to me are in a place where just a few years ago a small seal called a bulla was discovered, dating back about 2,700 years. On this seal is inscribed a name written in ancient Hebrew. The name is Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah, and this refers to the biblical King Hezekiah, a descendant of King David. When we think of the great figures in the Bible, there may not be many others whose existence, as well as the events attributed to this person in the scripture, are so solidly confirmed from an archaeological perspective as finding the king's own seal. But not only that, just 3 years later, in 2018, very close to this site, Dr. Eilat Mazar, a world-renowned archaeologist, made a discovery of a small seal. Another small seal bearing the name of one of the most significant figures in scripture and definitely one of the great prophets. This seal, dating roughly to the same time about 2,700 years ago, is again written in ancient Hebrew. We see only 2 lines of text. On one line is the name Isaiah, and on the second line appears the word prophet, almost entirely written out. From this, scholars conclude that the seal certainly belonged to the well-known prophet Isaiah, which, interestingly enough, was a contemporary of King Hezekiah, making this discovery even more significant due to the previous seal of King Hezekiah. Now, number 7, the Egyptian pharaohs and the Merneptah stele. As you might not find it very difficult to guess, there are numerous Egyptian inscriptions that testify that Israel was a nation in Canaan, the most famous of which is probably the Merneptah stele, on which this pharaoh boasts that he conquered Israel. This tablet is one of the earliest references to Israel outside the Bible itself. In it, he himself says, Israel is devastated, his seed is no more. This coincides completely with the presence of the Israelites, which we see described in Judges 1, when they begin to inhabit Canaan, and confirms that there was such an existing people Israel, but there is also one other discovery, which some even dispute, that is even older, and although it is less known, the inscription of Pharaoh Seti I It mentions the tribe of Asher and even earlier, the so-called Berlin pedestal, which almost certainly refers to Israel, again mentioning this people as a nation in Canaan. It contains three names, one of which is clearly read as Ashkelon, the other is Canaan, and the third is partially but certainly well reconstructed as Israel. This proves that the Israelites were in Canaan somewhere in the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, which exactly matches the information we encounter in the Bible. Number 8. The ossuary of Caiaphas. Do you remember Caiaphas? Yes, the very high priest before whom Jesus was brought in that fabricated trial when the Pharisees accused Jesus and tried to find a reason to condemn him to death. And it is this Caiaphas, the high priest, who ultimately accuses Jesus of blasphemy and is the reason for his execution. His bones were found. This astonishing discovery was made in 1990 when a huge limestone vessel was found on which the inscription Caiaphas was inscribed. This ossuary contains the bones of a man around 60 years old, which coincides with the age of Caiaphas, and the exquisite design and details on the ossuary itself, as well as the inscription itself, confirm that this was not just an ordinary man. According to scholars, this is most likely the same Caiaphas who is mentioned in the Gospels of Josephus, one famous Jewish historian. He also mentions Caiaphas as the high priest, which further connects this physical evidence to biblical and historical texts, as mentioned in Matthew 26:57. Those who had arrested Jesus led him away to Caiaphas, the high priest. Number 9, the Mesha tablet. This is next to me. The Mesha tablet, also known as the Youth Tablet, it is a 2,800-year-old Old Testament artifact discovered in Jordan in 1868. This stone block completely changes the understanding of many scholars of ancient history. In general, King Mesha of Moab wrote it, boasting that he defeated Israel during the time of King Omer. However, as stated in 2 Kings 3 in the Bible, it also mentions the house of Omer, and which coincides with the text of 2 Kings 3 chapter 4 and 5, where we read that Mesha stopped paying tribute to Israel. This tablet not only confirms that there were relations between Israel and Moab, but also provides a broader context for considering the way of governing Syria. At that time, the interesting thing about the Mesha stele is that it shows the Moabite side of the whole story and sheds a lot of clarity between the two sides that had a conflict. This is one piece of evidence that the Bible absolutely accurately presents the events, because even though in this case they are the losing side, they truthfully and reliably recount what happened. Now, number 10, remains from the Red Sea. In the spring of the year 2000, a robotic camera was first sent down to the bottom of the Red Sea. What is seen and revealed through the eyes of this camera are many shapes and objects, including coral formations that have straight angles, arches, discs, wheels, and other such structures that are interconnected and represent a huge ruin. These objects are repeated over and over again when examining the bottom of the Red Sea, and many times when archaeologists see something and think it's nothing more than coral, they realize that it is. They are not just ordinary coral formations, but are actually something like axles and wheels that have coral and adhesions on them. During the initial research, which was carried out in the city of Nuweiba, which is in Egypt, a distinctive and slightly different object was noticed, which is located on the seabed, a thin rod which, however, has something round at its two ends. And in other places this thing is also seen upright, and despite the coral coverings, it is visible and becomes obvious to archaeologists and scientists that they see in front of them one wooden wheels, most likely part of larger chariots. The amazing thing is that the discovered wheels are similar in size to other ancient Egyptian artifacts that were found exactly at the alleged location, which corresponds to the events described in the Bible. Exodus chapter 14 verse 25 we read, "And troubled the Egyptian army and caused their chariots to be confused. They could not go. And the Egyptians said, 'Let us flee from Israel, because the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians.'" And in other places this passage is literally translated, "And the Lord looked down upon the Egyptian army and caused the wheels of their chariots to come off." These underwater explorations of the bottom of the Red Sea reveal remains that, according to scientists, are believed to be exactly those wheels of the Egyptian chariots. In support of this, numerous human remains have been found. You can easily guess that these discoveries closely resemble the story we read in Exodus chapter 14 verse 28, where it says, "The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen." The entire army of Pharaoh. Thus we see how God through Moses divides. It leads to the Red Sea, the Israelites cross the sea, explore the waters, return, and forever, as to this day their chariots, swords, and everything else remain in ruins at the bottom of the sea. Unique bonus Gideon's Cup. Relatively recently in 2019, one discovery was made which is called Gideon's Cup. These fragments of ceramics on which there is written in brown ink, they were found at the site of Kirbet El Raz, just 4 kilometers from Lachish in Israel. The fragments were found in a large stone vessel that was at some point used as a dump. According to scholars, these fragments were thrown there sometime between the 12th and early 11th centuries BC, and what was written on the inscriptions was Jirubal. The translation of this name is literally read as Nekaval. This inscription competes with it. It is of great significance precisely because it coincides with the nickname given to Gideon in Judges 6:31-32 after Gideon destroys his father's place of worship at Baal. It is not entirely clear whether this inscription is a direct reference to the biblical hero Gideon. However, the date of writing, according to scholars, coincides with the time in which Gideon lived, even if we have no way of proving with certainty that this cup belonged to Gideon himself. This inscription shows that this name was still in use during the latter part of the time of the judges in the Bible, and again, like all the other artifacts, this one confirms the credibility and authenticity of the biblical book of Judges. This video was a little different than the others so far, but it was so encouraging to me to see all this evidence for our Bible that we honor, we respect and consider as an authority. Let me know if you enjoyed this video and if you want me to post this type of content from time to time, especially considering that there are many other artifacts that could be mentioned. If you want a part 2 of this video, just let me know in the comments so I can see. If this video encouraged you as well, hit that like button or share it with other friends so they can be encouraged too. If you want to support me, you can do so with a super thanks button and subscribe so you get notifications for the next videos on the channel. The bell will notify you. Thanks to Georgi Dimov and Stamen Tsipora for filming me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.